welcome to the Marley Bird YouTube channel. In this video, I'll show you how to make the creative collar shawl. This is a beautiful shawl with simple construction, and it uses 2 balls of Red Heart Comfort Chunky. This is a bulky weight yarn, a size 5 Craft Yarn Council yarn, and you need 2 balls of these to complete this really great shawl. Sometimes when you just want to make something super simple without any shaping, with just general construction, you will gravitate towards a shawl, but you want it to have some interest. Well, this one definitely has that. Not only that, it is a free pattern available over on redheart.com. I'll be sure to put a link to the pattern right down there in the video description box below. And while you're down there, please smash that like button, as my kids say, so that other people know you enjoyed this video. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at the shawl so you can get an idea of what the shape is you are using when you construct this shawl. So my camera doesn't allow me to show you the full shawl, but I will start off here at the bottom, and this is just a large rectangle, okay? And you'll start off down here at the bottom with some garter stitch. The biggest thing to remember about this is it's not only garter stitch at the bottom. At the edges here, the designer has you maintain a seed stitch along the entire project. Super easy as long as you follow the instructions. And what I'm going to do is recommend that you put a stitch marker on those first 2 stitches and last 2 stitches, so that way you remember to keep them in seed stitch. Once you have established the garter stitch section, you move into stockinette, and then you do a couple of different rows of garter stitch again. You do 1 row of garter stitch, some stockinette, couple rows of garter stitch, stockinette, and then 3 different garter stitch ridges. I shouldn't call these rows, these are ridges. So this would be 2 rows of garter, 4 rows of garter, 6 rows of garter, but it creates 1 ridge, 2 ridge, and 3 ridges. Once you've done that, you carry on making some more stockinette, and you finish off with garter stitch at the top. Once that is all complete, what you will do is you come to the top of the project. This is the top of the shawl right here, and you will actually pick up stitches along this edge. When you pick up those stitches, you then will begin to work this flap here, which is your collar. And so you'll work the collar in such a way that when it flips over, the right side, so the stockinette side, is actually showing on the stockinette side of the shawl. So when you're making this, it'll look like you have the wrong side next to the right side, but when it flips over, it all comes out okay. So if you take a look up here, I will hold this up, and you can see this is just, it's a giant rectangle. And then once you pick up those stitches and create this collar, that's what flips over and creates that really cool collar. So then you could throw this on over your shoulders and have a really great look. Now that you've seen how easy this particular piece is, there's just a couple things you need to know in order to make this really great for the beginner knitters out there. So what I'm going to do is, in this video, I will show you how to cast on. I will show you how to use those markers to make sure you keep those outside stitches in seed stitch. I will show you how to knit, I will show you how to purl, and I will show you how to pick up stitches and bind off. These are all things you'll need to know in order to complete this entire project. I know you can do this. You don't need a whole lot of instructions, maybe just a little refresher, and you can make this really great project all for yourself. As I mentioned, the link to the pattern and the materials is in the video description box below. Go ahead and gather your stuff, join me back here, and I'm going to get you started on a little sample of this really great shawl. As I mentioned, this is a really great shawl for beginners. There's just a couple of things I need to teach you or refresh your memory with, and you'll be on your way. The first thing I want you to do is grab your circular needles. You'll notice in the materials list, you're using circular needles, and that's to accommodate the number of stitches you will be using for this shawl. Once you have your circular needles, don't be scared. You use them just as you do straights. They just happen to be joined down here at the bottom. So we will still knit all of our stitches off our left needle and then rotate over so that our stitches are over here on our left needle to knit them onto our right needle. Does that make sense? It will here in just a minute. This pattern has you cast on 125 stitches. I love to use the long tail cast on, but I know many of you get scared that you don't have the tail long enough. Well, one thing that's really great about this particular shawl is it uses 2 balls of yarn. So in theory, we could actually use both of those balls of yarn when we're doing our cast on, and we won't run out of yarn as we're working along. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to use 2 different colors of yarn for this demonstration so that way you can see how this works. Of course, your yarn would be the same color. Go ahead and take your yarn and create a slip knot. Place the tail of your yarn in the palm of your hand. Take your working yarn, both strands, wrap around your forefinger and middle finger. When you come back up, cross over. Rotate your hand over, go underneath the front loop and grab the back loop and off. So that way we have a slip knot, okay? I'm going to place this slip knot directly onto my needles and know that I am not going to keep this slip knot. I'm going to get rid of it at the end. I'm not going to use it. Could you use it? Yes, but I'm not going to, and I'll show you why. As we do the long tail cast on, typically we have to use the tail of the yarn we just did and then the working yarn. Well, what we have just done is we have created our yarn to have a tail and a working yarn in 2 different strands. So now, no matter how long our tail is, it's still attached to my skein of yarn and I'm not going to run out. How cool is that? So let's go ahead and do the long tail cast on. Take one strand and put it towards the left, the other and put it towards the right. Take your hand and go in between those 2 strands and come up, create like a gun. Once you've created this gun, you're going to grab those outside strands. And now we're going to pull this down and we have a slingshot and we're ready for the long tail cast on. If you need a slower version of the long tail cast on, please go ahead and click that little I button right there and it'll take you to a video I did specifically for the long tail cast on. Once you've reached this position, you will begin by going up your thumb, down your finger, through the window and off. Up, down, through, off. Up, down, through, off. Up, down, through, off. You would do this for 125 stitches. Remember, do not count those first 2. And that is what you would need to start off your entire shawl. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to do a fewer number of stitches for my demonstration here, but I'm just going to keep going here until I have the number of stitches I want. And once I have that, I will carry on with the strand that is on the needle right here. So this would be my blue strand. And my pink, I can go ahead and just cut it, leaving a nice little tail, and pull it aside and just leave it be. I'm not going to run out. How cool is that? When I come back down this direction, I will let those 2 stitches just fall off and they will go away. Pretty cool, right? Go ahead and cast on the number of stitches you need for your shawl, which is 125, and we will jump into the next step. For the next step, we begin by working on the wrong side, and you start off by knitting 1 stitch and purling 1 stitch. So you turn your work, and I'm going to go ahead, I will hold my yarn in my right hand, and I will knit the first stitch. So I will go in from left to right, yarn over my right hand needle, pop out the stitch, and then let that stitch jump off. Now I need to purl the next stitch. When I purl the next stitch, I need to bring my yarn between my needles. Now I go into the stitch I want to purl, yarn over my needle, pop out that stitch and off. Now the next stitches I'm going to knit, so I'll bring my yarn back to the back and I'll knit those. But this is where I want to pause. And remember, these first 2 stitches in the pattern are going to be kept in seed stitch. So to remind myself that I have to do something with those first 2 stitches and then the last 2 stitches also, I like to use a stitch marker to place directly onto my needle and just keep those as separate. It's just a little clue for me to remember that there's something different going on there. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and I will knit all the way down to the last 2 stitches, where I will then purl 1 and then knit 1. But before I do that, I will place another marker. So that way I have that reminder that those are going to be in seed stitch. Oops, if you split the yarn, make sure you don't just keep going. You go ahead and go back and fix that. And this is knitting. This is just the basics of knitting. If you want a more specific video just for knitting, of course, I've got that here also. You can check out that little I button as well. But this is just really basic, really comfortable. And what's really awesome is because we started with the long tail cast on, we're automatically jumping into a really great garter stitch. Now, as you look down here, you can see it looks like I have 4 stitches left. But remember, I don't want to keep those 2 stitches. So these are going to be the 2 stitches I want to keep. I'm going to take my second marker, place it onto my needle, and then I will do a purl one. So I bring my yarn between my needles, go into the stitch, oops, and purl it. Bring my yarn between my needles and knit the next stitch. Now these last 2 stitches, I'm literally going to take my needle out and just voila, they're gone. How cool is that? So now my stitches are all over here. I can rotate and put my needle in my left hand, so that way I'm ready to work this side. And I can go ahead and continue on in pattern, which means I have to do what I just did 9 more times, okay? So I will start off here, just like before, with a knit one, and then a purl one. So I bring my yarn between my needles and purl that stitch. Oops. Bring my yarn between my needles. When you come to this marker, you literally are just going to slip it over. Don't do anything else with it, just slip it over. Then I go ahead and continue on knitting. Pretty easy, right? And what you will notice is on the outside edge, you will notice that you are beginning to knit on top of purls and purl on top of knits. Because what seed stitch is, it's the opposite of what the stitch is as it's facing you. So that gives you a really cool seated look. I'm coming down here to my next marker. I go ahead and slip my marker over. I bring my yarn forward. I will purl this stitch. Bring my yarn back, and I will knit this stitch. Pretty simple. Turn your work, and you carry on. Okay, now you're going to repeat that 8 more times because we just did it 1 more. Once you have a total of 10 completed rows, we're ready to move on to the stockinette portion. Once you've completed all the garter stitch section, your work will look something a little bit like this. Of course, I have a different color here because that's how I showed you the cast on, but you'll have a nice garter stitch and you'll have some seed stitch out here on the edges. Now the next portion, we begin to work some stockinette, and you'll start off on the wrong side of your work. And what you will do is you will begin with your knit one, purl one, just like you've been doing all along, because we want to maintain that seed stitch here. So we do our knit one, purl one, we'll slip our marker, and then it says we will begin to purl our entire row all the way to this marker. So to purl, we bring our yarn between our needles, and then we purl. Super easy. We just continue to do this all down the row. What stockinette is, it's a combination of a knit row and a purl row. And as long as you keep all the purls on one side and all the knits on the other side, you get a really nice smooth fabric. Now, as most of you know, I am not traditionally a English style knitter. That's where you hold the yarn in your right hand. So my purling might look a little bit awkward. I apologize for that, but it's the same process regardless. Come to my marker, I'll slip my marker, move that off, purl the next stitch because that's what my seed stitch pattern is, bring my yarn between my needles, and then knit my last stitch. Now when I turn my work, you will begin to notice there's a little bit of a change in your work. No longer is it solely garter stitch. You have some really nice stockinette stitches happening there, some V's. Those are the knits. So now that I've turned my work, I would carry on with my pattern. I would knit the first stitch, bring my yarn between my needles to purl the next stitch, slip my marker, bring my yarn between my needles, and then I would knit all the stitches down this row. What's really great about using these markers is that as you're knitting along, you don't have to remember, oh, I have to do something different when I get down to the last 2 stitches. The marker's already there and it's telling you what to do. So all I'll do is I'll slip my marker, bring my yarn forward, purl that first one, bring my yarn back, and then knit the last one. Always make sure when you're going from a purl to a knit or a knit to a purl, you bring the yarn between the needles before you go into those stitches. Now that I've done that, you can see I'm starting to get a little bit more stockinette fabric there. And you would continue working in the stockinette fabric until the piece measures 6 inches. Once this measures 6 inches, you then go back into a garter ridge and you would knit a couple rows. So in theory, you know everything you need to know to create the body of this shawl. You already know how to do the garter stitch, you know how to maintain the seed stitch, and now you know how to do the stockinette. What you have to know now is how do we bind off and then how do we pick up stitches to do the flap? So let's get to that point now. I've gone ahead and worked some garter stitch because that's what you're going to bind off on. And let's go ahead and bind off these stitches. When you bind off stitches, you're essentially having the front stitch jump over the back stitch as they're resting on your right hand needle. So let's go ahead and knit these first 2 stitches. So we'll knit the first and knit the second. I no longer need this marker, so I'm going to drop it off and let it go away. Now what I want to do is I want to have this stitch jump up and over this one and off. So I'm going to take my needle, go into that one, and bring it up and over top of the needle and off. Now I take my left hand needle out of it, and what you can see here is that stitch is almost like it's strangling the throat of this stitch, and it's locked in place. Now we are left with 1 stitch on our right hand needle, which means we have to knit another stitch from our left hand needle so that we can do this again. Have the back stitch jump up and over the front and off. You want to make sure you don't bind off too tightly, so make sure you're not pulling these stitches really tight as you're going along. Otherwise, your shawl will start to bunch at the top. You could always use a larger needle to do this if you want to, but honestly, I feel like if you are just really careful, make sure you don't pull this yarn really tight to tighten up that stitch, you'll be good to go as far as the tension of your bind off. You do the bind off all the way down the row because we don't want any of these stitches to go anywhere, right? We don't want them to run down our hard work of the shawl. So we want to make sure that we are binding off all of these stitches all the way down the row. Super easy. You always get to 2 stitches on your right hand needle and then have the back one jump up and over the front one. Back, jump up and over the front, and you keep going. When you get to your marker again, you can remove the marker and then just continue on. Back, jump over the front. And on this last one here, back, jump over the front, we're left with 1 stitch. Go ahead and cut your yarn. Give that a good pull. And that is your bind off edge. See how it looks like a nice row of V's and it has a good stretch to it. But that would be your, like the body of your work would actually be a lot larger than this. But essentially this is what it is. It's a larger rectangle. So once you get the body of the work done, what I would do is I would weave in your ends and weave in your tails. You could always use a bent tip tapestry needle to do that. You could weave them in or bury them in, whichever you choose. And then you will need to then pick up stitches along the bind off edge up here so that way we can create that collar. If you remember, the collar of your piece looks a little bit like this. It's hard for me to show you on the top-down camera, and not a little bit like this. This is it. It's just another rectangle, but it's joined to the shawl you just created. And in order to make sure it's placed properly, what we will do is we will measure from the edge towards the center for 16 inches. Once we get that measurement towards the center, you'll place a marker at that point. Then you do from the edge on this side towards the center, and you would place a marker at that point, okay? So once I have my 2 markers in place, see this? Once I have those 2 markers in place, I've essentially marked the center of my shawl. From marker to marker, I would then go in and pick up and knit a total of 52 stitches. Now, obviously on my little tiny swatch, I'm not going to pick up 52 stitches, but I can show you how to pick up stitches on the swatch, and that's what I will do now. Okay, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to place the two stitch markers in here so that way you can see what it looks like and they can represent the place that you would be putting the collar on your own shawl, okay? So it would be roughly like that. What you would do then is you would take your needles and you would take your yarn, okay? And we are going to, with the right side facing us, so the side that has the stockinette stitch facing you, with the right side facing you, we are going to pick up and knit a total of 52 stitches. Now what's really great is we have this nice bound off edge here. So if we wanted to, we could go into each stitch individually and pick them up. And that's what I suggest. The only thing there is if your markers are more than 52 stitches apart, you might have to fudge a little bit and skip over a mark or skip over a stitch and work the next one. Whatever works for you. You just need to make sure you get 52 stitches in here. So to pick up a knit, you literally will go into the stitch, take your yarn, okay, wrap it around your needle, and then pop your needle out with that yarn still attached. Can you see that? So then I would go into the next one. I go into that next stitch, make sure I grab the working yarn, wrap it around my needle, and then pull it out. Let me show you again. I will go into the next stitch. I'm going under both loops. I'm going to take my working yarn, wrap it around my needle, and then take my needle and pop it out. Now, if that's a little bit too hard for you to get these stitches to pop out, let me show you another way. If you use the other end of your needle and place this end of your needle in the stitch you want to work into, okay? So now that stitch looks like it's an actual stitch on my left-hand needle. So I could take my right-hand needle, go into that stitch with it. You see that? And now I act like I'm just knitting. So I yarn over and then pull out and off. See how that works? I'll go into the next stitch over. So I put my left-hand needle in it, take my right-hand needle, go into that stitch just as if it was a stitch on my left-hand needle, and then knit that stitch. You see how that works? Pretty cool, huh? One other way you could do this is by using an actual crochet hook. If you have one laying around and you want to give it a try, this is how that would work. If you have a crochet hook, what you can do is go into the next stitch, yarn over your hook, and then pull that yarn over through the stitch and place it on your needle, okay? And so you can do it like that. So let me show you one more time. If I want to go into this stitch, and now I've split my marker here, so I'm going into that stitch, I yarn over, bring that through, and then I place that on my needle, okay? So those are 3 different ways you can pick up stitches. Once those stitches are on your needle, you're ready to jump into the pattern again. One thing you'll notice is that as you turn your work, the pattern itself says that you are on the right side. Just recall that that means you're on the right side of your collar, but it's going to be the wrong side of your fabric. Remember, because we want our collar to lay down so that the right side is showing when the right side of the shawl is showing. So as you turn this over, you would jump into your pattern, which once again is knit 1. Let me get all these strings here. So I would knit 1 and then purl 1 because we want to maintain that seed stitch. And I could bring my stitch markers in once again, put it on there, and I would knit to the last 2 stitches, which is going to be really quick for me. I could place my marker again, and I purl 1 and knit 1. So on and so forth. So that way when I turn my work, I am on my pattern. I'm ready to go. And my work is attached to the body of my shawl. Let me go ahead and bring in the actual shawl again so you can see how this join looks in action, because you don't need to see these stitches. All the stitches that are used in the collar are the exact same stitches you used in the shawl itself. But as I bring this up, let's see if you can take a look down here. So right here, this is the collar portion. You can see this is the right side of the shawl itself. This is the wrong side of the collar. So that way when the collar flips over and it rests on the shawl, it is right side and right side. But when we were picking up stitches for this particular shawl, if I pull this over, the right side was facing me, and we picked up stitches right up here along this edge right here. And so my pickup edge is actually right here on the inside, okay? And you're good to go. Pretty simple stuff. I don't know, once you keep going, you do follow along in pattern to do the ridges, you'll bind off, and bada bing, you have a really great shawl that you can take and throw over your shoulders. It looks like you have a really great collar, and it's a lot of fun to wear. It's really nice and warm. It uses the brand new Red Heart Comfort Chunky, just 2 balls. Hopefully you learned something new, and maybe the long tail cast on using 2 strands was something new for you, or picking up stitches was something new. You are becoming a capital K. Capital K, is that the correct? I don't know, a capital K knitter, and you can do anything. When you make this shawl, make sure you share with me on social media. Do hashtag #MarleyBird, and I'll be able to find this shawl. It is a beautiful shawl pattern designed by Jody Snyder. This was designed by Jody Snyder. This is a free pattern at redheart.com. The link is in the video description box below. Smash that like button, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye. Hey, don't leave yet. I'm sure there are other videos here that you will enjoy. Go ahead and check out some of my knitting and crochet videos, as well as some of my crafting videos. You will love them, I promise. If you hit subscribe, you'll be up to date whenever there's a new video released. And as my kids say, don't forget to smash that like button. Bye. Everything you need to know about knitting or crochet can be found right here on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. Learn with Marley. Visit youtube.com/